So before we begin, an exercise, if you would stand. Okay, good. Everybody who works at a company with more than 1,000 employees, sit down. More than 500 employees, sit down. More than 100. More than 50. More than 25. More than 10. More than 5. More than 1. All right, so there's our real startup people. Perfect. It helps get some context for who's in the room, because what I want to talk about today impacts companies as large as 400,000 people and as small as 1. It's about a way of looking at the way we orient and operate our businesses, our organizations, our agenda, our initiatives, and how we structure them, how we think about them to have the most impact, to make that strategy come to life in this age that we live in. So the topic of the speech, not surprisingly, is called the operating model that's eating the world. There's some really obvious and simple things going on, but they add up to something quite profound. So to start with, the dominant video player in the world today is a digital company. And what I mean by that is they don't have real estate where you go check out a video, right? They're a company that makes their money in ones and zeros, that is oriented around technology and software. Not surprising, probably every person in this room is a Netflix subscriber or a Hulu Plus subscriber, or they get their content from a digital channel. That's obvious, that's simple. Today's dominant music service is also a digital company, right? And in fact, there's a couple other really smart digital companies right in their wake, like Spotify, radio, others. Again, right, this is a company that makes its living through technology. It approaches the customer through creating utility and solutions, whether that's hardware or software. Not surprising, you guys all know that. Today's top performing auto stock is a digital company. Now, Brad Feld, who's a pretty prominent venture capitalist, often says that, you know, the best hardware is just software wrapped in plastic. As someone that has several friends with Teslas, this is really, really good software wrapped in aluminum. This is a company run by a software engineer, by a guy who started PayPal, among others, a guy that thinks differently about the way you might build an automotive brand, and it's dominating. If any of you bought early Tesla stock, good for you. But then you start looking down the list. Direct marketing, gaming, recruiting, telecom, retail. We could go on and on and on. There's a whole groundswell of categories where the leading player, the dominant player, or the fastest growing player, the one that is shaking shit up, is a digital company. It's a company that's operating differently, that's hiring differently, that's made up of people that think a certain way, have certain skills, are approaching problems in a very particular way. And then there's this group of categories over here that are sort of watching that and waiting and biding time and thinking about how they operate, and some of whom are completely denying the fact that those things are happening, right? If I'm in the engine business, I don't have to worry about digital. It's not about technology. It's metal. It's steel. If I'm in the train business, I don't have to worry about this. If I sell TVs, I don't have to worry about this. But as we'll see, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And what I like to ask is, when I get in the room with somebody, is the dominant brand in your category a digital company? Is the dominant player in the space someone that is operating in tune with the way the world works today? And whether you're a one-person startup or a 500,000-person, massive empire around the world, the question is just as relevant, because it's not a yes-no question. It's a not-yet question. And so if you're building something that's supposed to become this player, then you want to build it in the right way. You want to build it knowing everything that we can take advantage of today. And if you're already there, if you're big, if you're established, if you're trying to continue to have the impact and the influence that you worked so hard to gain, then you have to think about transformation. You have to think about how to acclimate to what's going on. So if we start with this premise that today's fastest growing, most profoundly impactful companies are using a different operating model, then the question is, what the hell is that operating model? And we, at my company, have spent the last couple of years studying big and small players to think about what is it that they're doing differently? What is it that Uber is doing differently than the taxi commission, than the livery company down the street? How are they doing business differently? Not just their product or their service, but how are they making choices differently? And that's what we want to understand, because once we understand that, we can run our lives, our meetings, our organizations, our disciplines, our departments, our businesses in the most optimal way possible. So how is it that a new model is relevant? How is it that a new model is possible? Why is this suddenly happening? Why has this been kind of chipping away since the advent of the personal computer? And what we're feeling is that essentially, as technology got more personal and the ability to create things, whether that be hardware in your garage with a CNC machine, or fabricating something on your MakerBot, or writing software at home on your laptop or your iPad, as that becomes more accessible, the ability for things to iterate gets more rapid, right? Because more people are touching it, there's less barrier to entry, there's more access, there's more exposure. And when things move faster, when generations occur with more rapidity, you get faster variation, you get faster evolution, right? So it's as if we used to evolve every 30 years, and now we evolve every 10 minutes. And so it's not that the nature of evolution's changed, it's that how fast we get better has changed. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see this. You go online and you can see it in any measure of category. You can even see it in human endeavor. The greatest athletes today in golf, in skateboarding, in skiing, in basketball are leagues better than their predecessors ages ago, because this idea of moving forward, of changing, of iterating, of improving has gotten stronger and more potent. And a perfect example of this is something that happened in our office about 6 months ago. We were playing with our mini fridge, and we started joking about why fridges are so dumb, which I'm sure is a discussion you guys have all had as well. Fridges are super dumb. In fact, they don't really do much, and if you read about new fridge enhancements, what you'll hear about is things like hot and cold water, or different sizes of ice, or bottom drawer freezer. None of those things are particularly appealing or enticing to me. And so we started talking about what would a smart fridge look like. Well, a smart fridge would probably be able to tell you what's in it. It'd probably be able to tell you what you can make from what's in it. So what can I cook tonight based on what I have? It might tell you if you need to buy something tonight at the grocery on your way home from work. It might tell you how many calories you ate, or who opened the fridge and when. It might tell you if you leave the door open a crack and there's cold air pouring out into your house all day as your bill goes up. There's a number of things it could do. So why hasn't this industry done those things? Why is it that when you look at the appliance industry, they haven't created that fridge? So we said, well, there must be a technical reason, right? It must be really difficult to do or really expensive to do. So we set ourselves a challenge. Let's make a smart fridge this weekend. And so we did. So we got all the hardware, and we got all the modules, and we got a little Arduino board, and we got a soldering iron, and we went to work. And in a matter of a few days, we were able to make a fridge that has a lock on the door that's connected to a Fitband, a Fitbit or a fuel band. And if you don't exercise enough, it won't open, so you can't get that beer. We were able to make a fridge that has a sensor under all the major beverages, so that as you drink the milk, it knows whether you need to reorder. It knows whether the number of calories in the glass that you poured. We were able to put a barcode scanner on the outside so that if you scanned items as they went in, and eventually we were thinking about doing some object recognition, it could tell you, based on the fact that you have chicken and broccoli and olive oil and salt and pepper, tonight you should make this kind of chicken dish. So we built all that in a few days, and we put it out online. We put the little story of putting it together online, and people away as far as China were writing us asking if they could order the fridge. And literally, please, sir, may I order 1,000 fridges, and I have, this many Chinese dollars. And we wrote back this was just an experiment. We are not even trying to start a business. We're not trying to do this. This isn't even our fridge. And of course, they were really, they're upset about that, and I'm upset about that, but it shows that you can essentially make a smart fridge business over a weekend and get an order from China in 48 hours. If I'm GE Appliances, if I'm Samsung Appliances, yeah, I'm doing an accelerator. The world has changed. The land shift that's going on is pretty seismic. Another example, right in our own backyard, MakerBot, right, starts at what is essentially a local tech meetup, a hobbyist group where they play with technology, starts to put together their own 3D printer at low cost because 3D printers are outrageously expensive in the market right now. It's $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 for one that has any kind of resolution. And they go out to make one for a couple $1,000. They succeed. It's cobbled together. There's a lot of wires and whatnot. But a few years later, it looks like this, and it's printing at 100 micron resolution. And it's using different materials and colors, and they're able to refine the process, and they're able to create a platform where people from all around the world are uploading their designs and sharing them for free. And this notion of a perfect market of hardware and stuff starts to become possible. If you design a toothbrush, and I design a toothbrush, and 1,000 other people design a toothbrush, and one of them is the best toothbrush ever made, you don't have to wander down the aisle at the supermarket trying to guess what that is. There is a known best toothbrush, and you can print it for yourself at home and brush your teeth with it. That idea of a perfect hardware market, again, just cooked up over the space of a few years, and of course, not surprisingly, someone swooped in and bought them for a few $100 million, which is not bad for a few years' work, and they're not done. The job has really just begun. So that's the world that we're living in. Now, what I was talking about before was this idea of an operating model, how we think about problems, right? An operating model is how do you make decisions? How do you operate? How do you do what you do? And my favorite example of a digital operating model, and I use the word digital in quotes all the time because I'm not talking about just software, I'm talking about a way of thinking, is a company called Kiva Systems. And if you haven't heard of Kiva, what happened with Kiva is a while back, many years ago, they were trying to raise money to create a robot that would move shelves around in a warehouse. And if the robot could move shelves around, then it could do a very particular service for warehouses that are stocking packages to ship. What it could do is it could bring the item that needs to be packed to the person packing the box and point to it on the shelf, this is the item you need to pack, and they could grab it and put it in their box, and then the shelf would walk away and kind of has a little personality. And then what they did is they figured out, well, wait a second, if there's data there, maybe we can do something more. But to do that, we need to grow, we need to have access. And so what ends up happening is they get bought by Amazon. And they get bought by Amazon for a few $100 million as well. So this is a good business to be in. And what they do with Amazon is they figure out a way to not only point to the thing that needs to be packed, but to start to think about the entire floor of the warehouse differently. So if you're in the warehouse game 10 years ago and someone says, I need you to optimize this warehouse, you're thinking about, all right, well, we're going to put the stuff people buy the most in the front and the stuff people buy the least in the back. And we're going to put the stuff that's heaviest closer to the packers, and we'll put the light stuff further away, and we'll put people on bikes, and we'll let them ride around and pick stuff up as fast as they can and put it in their little basket like Dorothy and Toto and bring it back to the packer. And that's how we'll do business. And that's how the warehouses worked up until Kiva and similar systems like it came into being. There were literally people on bikes having bike accidents at Amazon 5-6 years ago. That's happening. What Kiva does is they say, wait a second, if we have these robots underneath the shelves, then not only can we bring you the thing you need to pack, but while you're packing that, the robots can be listening to the data from the orders that are coming in on the web every minute, every day, every week, every month, and they can start to reconfigure themselves in a way that's optimal for the problem. So if it's Christmas time, all the shelves that hold Christmassy stuff, decorations and wreaths and such, and new golf clubs, start to move to the front of the warehouse. And they get to stay there for the month of December, and then when December's over, they start to move away from the front of the warehouse because they're no longer relevant and important. And then golf season comes and the golf clubs get a second shot at it, and then they have to go back. Nobody would have thought about the problem that way except this company and the people like them, right? It's a weird way to think about the problem, to say we could use the data from the orders to have robots move the shelves around so that the warehouse is a living, breathing organism that is reorganizing itself for optimal efficiency. That is crazy science fiction to somebody that managed a warehouse even 10 years ago. And that's the world that we live in today. That's what thinking with a digital operating system means. And with any problem that you start to attack, you want to be thinking about it in that way because that is the dominant paradigm of thinking that is winning out there. It's not about just making a device. It's about figuring out the interconnectivity between the device, the community, the platform, the product, the customers, the entity itself. There's a whole network effect that's going on in these businesses that is totally stunning. So these are the elements that we're talking about. When we look at an operating system, we're really talking about 5 elements. The purpose that applies process to support people who make products that grow into platforms, sometimes, that serve a community larger than any employee, department, or organization. And when we look at the companies that are really dominating, this is what they're doing. They've got a really clear purpose that they understand, that they follow, that they live and breathe, right? And that they're trying to deliver in the world. No, not to be too nice to the host or anything, but Behance has a really clear purpose, empowering the creative community. That's what they're out to do, so they understand that. Process. How are we going to do it? How will we organize? Will we have big teams of 50 people that have to approve 50-page documents that go up to senior management in order to get a rubber stamp so that we can fund a 9-month project to decide if we'll do the thing that we might want to do? Or would we do a 2-pizza team where if the team's too big to eat 2 pizzas and they can't make a decision in a week, then it doesn't happen? Well, you have to make those decisions. People, who are we going to hire? What skills do we need? Do we need managers with MBAs from Harvard? Maybe, maybe not. Do we need makers? Do we need designers? Do we need developers? Do we need people that can begin to test things in the marketplace? Probably. And what products, right? So products, services, models, new business models, right? How am I going to make money? Am I making money off the product, off the service, off a subscription, off the data? What model am I in? What business am I in? And then finally, platform. How does my business get bigger than itself? How do I create something that the rest of the world is building upon, right? I could be some kind of blog network where you write your blog on me, or I could be something like WordPress, where the world builds their system on me, or Amazon Web Services, right? These are the ideas that define platform. So if we start with the premise that the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. If we start with the premise that this operating system is out there, it's in use, but it's not in broad use, then the best way to understand it is to go out and look at the businesses that are on the edge of it, that are on the cusp, that are doing interesting work, and look at how they're doing it, and then bring that back to center. And so that's what I want to do, is essentially walk you guys through just a few examples from each area, from each P of the digital operating system, some of whom you're very familiar with, but maybe haven't looked at through this lens, and some of whom maybe you've never heard before, and talk about how they're doing business, how they're thinking about problems in order to solve problems. So here we go. First, we'll start with purpose. Purpose is on the outside. Purpose is the biggest box because everything has to be subject to it. So if we're building a nested system, purpose is the big bowl in the mixing bowl set. And everything is subscribing to this idea. So if we think about purpose, a few traits, right? So Facebook, for good or for bad, I'm not a daily user or anything, but Facebook is very clear about their mission, to give people the power to share, to connect the world. If you read Zuckerberg's shareholder letter, he's going to say outright, it's not about the money, I'm still wearing a hoodie. It's not about the money. It's about the mission. It's about connecting people in this way. And we'll do anything to deliver on that mission. So the idea of putting values ahead of revenues is really, really interesting. And you see it happen at Apple. You see it happen at Amazon. I mean, go pick up a Jeff Bezos shareholder letter. In fact, if you haven't read them all cover to cover from 1996 on, go home and do that immediately. It's going to say, this is our mission. This is the game we're playing. It's long term. If you don't like it, get out. Don't buy the stock. So this idea of values ahead of revenues is really important, and it defines the nature of how powerful that purpose can be. Second thing is the business model. So within the purpose context, a lot of these companies are thinking about new ways to deliver value, new ways to deliver their purpose. So whether it's Tom's or Warby Parker or Newman's Own or anything back to the Stone Age, there are ways to link purpose into the thing that we're doing. If you're MakerBot, democratizing production of stuff, democratizing the world of stuff is a mission you can deliver just by helping get the printer out there. But maybe you make the platform free, right? Maybe you make Thingiverse free because you don't need to make money there. You just want to have your purpose be delivered upon in that context. And then finally, Tesla, which we talked about a minute ago. Playing a long game is a really good sign that a company has their purpose screwed on tight. If they're willing to play a 5-year, 6-year, 7-year bet in the market and let things play out, that's a good sign that they're running a digital operating system. They're not playing to the quarter. They're not playing to the street. They're playing to the purpose. And that means that they might have to make bets that have to wait and play out and cash out over time. So those are 3 ideas that define purpose. What about process? So process is nested within purpose because once we know what we want to do, we have to figure out how we're going to do it. And one of the mistakes that small businesses make, and big businesses too, or at least they suffer from it, is they make people choices before they make process choices. If you make people choices before you make process choices, you run into trouble because you may hire people that don't believe what you believe about how to do the work. And then suddenly you have some people that are trying to do agile, lean, aggressive, fast, test and learn prototyping, and other people that are like, man, I could really go for a Gantt chart right now. And so, the Gantt chart people got that joke. So that idea is really important, and it's missed. You just go out, you find people that seem to buy into your purpose. They're interested in what you want to do in the world. They're interested in your startup or your movement. but they may not have the same orientation about how to get the work done, and that becomes a problem. So the second thing is process. How are we going to do the work of the organization? Are we going to do it with lean startup methodology? Are we going to do it, are we working for NASA, and so it has to be very rigid, it has to be defined, it has to be safe, it has to work? Are we working in like infant care in a neonatal unit product company? We're going to have a different process than if we're working in a different space. So the process is defined, and we think about process for the next 3 layers of the operating system. So we're going to think about making decisions about process now that will impact people and that will impact product and platform. So agile process, right? Looking at someone like Uber. Uber has decided that pushing updates and trying experiments in the market, moving to other markets quickly, is important to the way they're going to do business. And so if you've had the app, you've noticed that it's updated regularly. New kinds of cars, new markets that those cars work in, special days where there's ice cream trucks running around, or there's helicopters going to the Hamptons, or there's Back to the Future cars in San Francisco. They're trying things constantly, and as those things are tried, they're refining the model, they're refining the way they do service, they're refining the way they do pricing, they're refining the way that they go to market. And so there's an agility there, and there's a willingness to try that is risky and that is potentially, could cost focus and can cost success in the marketplace, could even cause, regulatory distress. There's been several markets they've gone into, like Vancouver, where they had to come back out, and they made a mistake. They spent money to go in, and then they had to come back out because they weren't allowed to be there from a regulatory perspective. But that's worth it if you've adopted an agile process. Results orientation is the next one, and looking at someone like Amazon, although there are many companies like this, they're thinking about the outcome as the thing that's going to decide, right? It's not the big poobah that's going to decide. It's not my boss or my boss's boss or my boss's boss that's going to make the choice. The process for decision is try it in the cheapest, nimblest, smallest way possible, and then we'll see. What does the data say? And a lot of digital OS companies think this way. They say, what's the data say? What does the data tell us about your idea, about your function, about your feature, about your program? Let that decide whether it's something that we need to do and pour money into. And you look at something like Amazon Web Services, it combines this idea of purpose and process quite well. It took 6 or 7 years for that thing to crack $500 million in revenue, which is not a lot of money to a company like Amazon. But then a few years later, it was $3 or $4 billion, and now they're looking at something like $15 billion of revenue over the next few years. So there's a long game there. And when it started, it was one guy. It was just one guy with a thing that was like, hey, we're building all this software and infrastructure that controls our stack. Maybe other people could take advantage of that. And then slowly but surely, it built response, it built following, it built structure. So the idea of incubating something that small and protecting it that long is important to process, and it's results-driven decision-making that does that. And then finally, an example from Quirky, also from our own backyard. Quirky has a validation approach to process that also goes with that results orientation. So sometimes before you can get results from the market, there are still ways to validate. There are ways to get a sense of what's going to work. And some people call this crowdsourcing or crowdfunding or crowd participation. But at the end of the day, it's just, are there ways to get signal on what's working? Are there ways to focus group? Are there ways to connect? And in this case, they have a really intricate community model where people touch the product at every stage, and they name it, and they shape it, and they color it, and they design it, and they approve the price, and the name, and the distribution. And in response for that, they earn a percentage of the revenue that comes out of the project. So there's a little bit of a reciprocation there that is powerful. And so those are 3 process orientations that are important. And they're not just 3. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of interesting things going on in the world of process that companies like these are bringing to bear that are fundamentally different from the legacy companies that we all look at. So now we'll go back and talk about people for a second. People, nested inside of process, are now the people that are going to go do the work, right? So that's you, that's your counterparts, that's the people that you bring to bear on the problem. And the way you think about people is really important. Are people there to manage the work that you've already decided? Are they there to manage products? Like we're a soft drink company and we need someone to manage Sprite, so just don't F it up and just manage it? Or are we talking about making things? Are we talking about building new lines of communication, new lines of business, new relationships out in the market? So Instagram's a cool example of one idea around people that's in the market, which is this idea that A players are dramatically better than B players, that having stunning colleagues matters. And if you read the handbooks of powerful cultures, OS cultures, they talk a lot about this. You know, there's the famous Steve Jobs quote that 1 A developer is worth 20 B developers. If you've never worked with developers, that sounds crazy. If you've worked with developers, it sounds totally sane, right? Somebody is capable of doing so much more because they're a little bit better. And when you look at a company like this, again, for good or for bad, 13 people are able to create a company with $1 billion in market value that's processing 30, 40 million photos a day. They're building with skills that allow them to do that. They're able to do that in such a short amount of time because they have the right skills for the job. They're tightly knit. They are all stunning to each other. There's no weak link in a team like that. You know? And what happens is, if you think about how many people it would take to do that at Kodak, let's say, not to be cruel, 13 is not the answer. You know? And so there's something about the way those people were chosen, the mindset of those people, the skill set of those people that's different. And that is that they are A players. They are top. And having a standard set and not diverting from it, even if you're busy, even if a new sponsor comes in and you really need to staff up, is a huge, huge distinction between the good and the bad. The second is this idea of makers, which I've already talked about a little bit, but it's the idea that you don't want, out of 10 people in your company, you don't want 7 to be managers. You know, if 7 people are managers and 3 people are makers, then you have 7 people telling 3 people what to do. And that is never a good idea. And if you've been one of those 3, you know what I'm talking about. So the idea is, how do you shift that dynamic to have 8 people be makers and 2 people be managers, maybe, and maybe they only come in on Friday. You know, the idea is really focus on the people that are able to do the work, because if the iteration is this fast, if the feedback from the market is this fast, we don't need as much management. We need more feedback. We need more data. We need more stuff to try in the market. We need more people to execute. So Local Motors is a really cool community because they've taken this to the bank, literally. They've gone out and found 30, 40,000 industrial engineers that, rather than work for them full-time, work for them part-time in this movement, this purpose-driven movement, to redefine what it is to build transportation and to build automobiles. And these guys are able to build from scratch a new vehicle, and this one in particular is one of their first that they ever launched. They're able to do that in 1/4 or 1/5 the amount of time that it takes a traditional auto manufacturer to go from concept to reality. And they're able to do that because everybody touching the thing is working on it. They're not approving PowerPoint on it. They're building it, they're making it, they're shaping it, they're testing it. And so that idea is really powerful, and it shows that the makers don't necessarily have to be in bed with you full time. They can be just part of your extended network, and that's the beauty of community, that's the beauty of this creative community. And then the third example, which is one of my very favorites, if you do one thing coming out of this speech, if you haven't read the Valve Employee Handbook, go read the Valve Employee Handbook. The Valve Employee Handbook is a document that a company out of Seattle that makes software and hardware for the gaming industry. They make some fairly famous games and some fairly famous game systems and platforms. This is a $4 billion market cap company with over 2,000 employees. So this is no joke. This is at least as big as Netflix in employee count. This is, you know, a serious line of business for any big Fortune 500 company on the planet. And these guys have essentially no management at all. In fact, when you get there, when you join the company, your job description has 2 bullet points. Bullet point 1, find something to work on. Bullet point 2, find other smart people like you to work here. Job description over. All the desks have wheels on them, and it's not by accident. You got to wheel your desk to wherever you're going to work. Join a team, find a place to go, do what you're going to do. And you know, there's things about that system that are imperfect. There's things about that are frustrating. There are times where they have to kind of be a little bit edge casey about that, like let's say accounting, where you have to kind of send someone their paycheck and make sure that it happens. But for the most part, the business is run this way. And it's an incredibly powerful thing, because when you hire A players, when you hire really talented people, and you hire makers who know how to get shit done and know what they want to do, then the best thing you can do is get out of the way and let them do it. And that is the idea that's enforced here, and it's enforced in other cultures like it. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about people and the shift in people that's gone on in the market. So now we'll switch gears and talk about product. So product is a thing that I think most of us think the most about day and night. It's the thing that we think about when we say, I have an idea for a company. We're basically talking about a product, right? I want to build an app that sends a black car to pick me up. We don't always know our purpose when we first set out, but we sometimes have a really good sense about this product that we want to build, this service that we want to build. But product is something that evolves over time, right? The thing you make now and the thing you'll make later are not always the same. And that's why it's nested within the rest of these areas. If you look at a company like Husqvarna, today they make chainsaws and lawnmowers, and they even make a self-driving lawnmower, which I think is kind of terrifying. But guess what they made when they first started almost 300 years ago? Muskets with the round kind of cornucopia, horn of plenty end, like muskets for the Swedish army. So if you're going to go from muskets to chainsaws, at least they're both violent. You have to have a pretty strong purpose that carries you along the way. And so product has a few really cool ideas going on in it. The first is this idea that is certainly not original to this stage, but the idea of the MVP, of the minimum viable product. It's a popular and often contested idea, but it's the notion that let's just get something out there. Let's get something out there that's just enough for the customer to play with, to sample, to try, to experience, and then we'll build more into it later. And that's easy to say, but hard to do. It's really easy to add features. It's easy to add functionality. It's easy to add time. It's easy to go back for more funding to sort of dilute the power of this idea. But when done right, it works, and it's quite important. Hue is an example of a company that generally doesn't operate with digital OS, but in this case was pretty smart about just putting a very simple, smart, connected light bulb out into the marketplace with a decent but not great app, with basic functionality, and just see what happens, right? And what happened is it sold out because people wanted to play with it, because it's a good enough idea, it's a good enough starting point that if you give somebody an LED light that's really, really low electricity, really bright light, that has Wi-Fi built into it, that you can hack and control and play with from your phone or your iPad, that's enough. It's enough to get people started. And now if you go back to the Apple Store, they have LED strips, and they have floodlights, and they've updated the app, and they've opened it up to if this then that, so you can hack it and connect it to, when I get a Twitter from the girl I like, have it turn red, the whole house turns red. That's you can do that stuff now, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, but they're going to let it continue to evolve, and that's the right way to think about it. The second thing is this idea of what is useful. What is the utility at the core of the product? And what a lot of businesses do as they grow is they start to think about, well, what can we do? What are we good at? What do we want to do? How do we want to do it? They stop thinking about what's the utility here? What's the purpose? What's the impact? What's the importance to the customer, to the user? And they miss things. And essentially, something like Airbnb is great because they're really just thinking about what's a problem we can solve. I don't know where I'm staying tonight, and I don't really have the money for a hotel necessarily, or a hotel feels, stodgy and disgusting to me if I have a UV light. And on the other side, I'm out of town. I'm not using my house, but I could sure use the money. And to connect the dots there, to be kind of a middleware or someone that facilitates that usefulness for both sides is a really powerful idea. So usefulness, utility is important in product. And finally, one of the most interesting to me, and especially connected to this idea of digital data and of information from the market, is the idea of learning. Products that do not learn by themselves in the future, I think, will be obsolete. Whether it's a piece of software or a piece of hardware or something in between, it should be getting smarter every day without you having to touch it. The Kiva robots are figuring shit out about that warehouse at night when we're all asleep. The Nest thermostat is figuring shit out about how hot or cold your house needs to be, how to save you energy, hopefully, if it's working correctly, all the time. Every time it's adjusted, it's noting that data, it's getting smarter about you and your habits. My blender does not do this. My fridge does not do this. My car does not do this, although there's a new startup called Automatic and another one that's competing with them that starts to get us there, starts to get information about how that car might get smarter. But whatever you're doing, think about, is there a way to code this, to build this, to think about this entity so that every day it's getting smarter about the customer, about what they need, about how they're using it, because it's a fundamental product shift that we're seeing in the digital OS. And then finally, nested all the way within, and of course this is where people with grandiose coffeehouse dreams always start, the platform, right? The platform is where the product becomes something more. Now it's not just for you and the customer, it's for everybody. It's become something that other businesses, other entities, other individuals are building upon for you and with you. And there's a really cool strategic advantage to that. If you think about somebody like Twitter, for instance, who's about to IPO, Twitter opens up their API and they let people build stuff on top of Twitter, whether it's TweetDeck or some kind of a data analytics app or a scoring app. They open up that API and they let people play in the sandbox. And people play in the sandbox and they build businesses. They build businesses that are worth lots and lots of money. But what Twitter gets to do that's so impressive is they watch that field of play, and when they see something that looks interesting that is working for customers, they have three choices. They can buy it, they can shut down the API to that person and start to try and build their own version of it, or they can, basically support that company, partner with them, enable it, play along, let it play out, see what happens next. And those are options for innovation that normal companies don't have. Normal companies don't have hundreds or thousands of people building the future of their business for them so that they can wait and watch and choose the things that they think are interesting. Or a company like Threadless or Quirky that gets to sit back while other people are designing and developing the material, the merchandise, vetting the merchandise, proving that the merchandise works in the market, and then paying for the merchandise. I used to hang out with the Threadless guys, and it's amazing that you can sit on a couch while people are on your website deciding what t-shirts they want, designing those t-shirts, voting on those t-shirts, ordering and buying those t-shirts, and you're on the couch. That's a good business. So platform is a really powerful one. It's the ultimate extension of the purpose into the market. It's the ultimate reach of what you're trying to do and what impact you want to have on the world. They can happen accidentally. There's no question about it. Here's an example of an accidental platform. Kinect from Microsoft, the Xbox 360 visual sensor, right, came out in the market. They didn't think about it as a platform, and then suddenly people started to hack it. And if you went to connecthacks.com, you would see all these people figuring out things they could do when they broke in and played with the application interface for Kinect. And for the first time, really ever, Microsoft did a really smart thing, and they said, yeah, let's play open. So they created that toolkit for the developers. They put a price tag on it, and they put it out in the market, and people started to mess with it. And that openness, that willingness to let people play with your stuff is a really key thing. When we're all kids and we learned how to share, learning how to share extends all the way into the product and platform space. And the openness allows things like surgeons to figure out how to use it, or people to put them on bomb-sniffing robots that run into the field and figure out what's going on, or people to use it to detect shapes or do underwater filming. And I mean, there's a number of things going on. If you check out Connect Hacks, there's a million things going on with this that are impressive and interesting, and building a whole network of meaning around a part of a brand that really was just for playing, Dance Dance Revolution. And then MakerBot, which we talked about before, the idea of community. Community is essential to platform. You can't have a platform without people building on it with you. And so you have to figure out who your community is. No matter what business that you're in, you have a community. Who's your community? What could they be building on and with you together? And in this case, certainly all the ideas, all the IP, all the flow of things that were moving around became that Thingiverse community that will, I'm sure, continue to grow and start to take on more and more interesting challenges for manufacturing. And then finally, the idea of the unknown. So in platform, what we're seeing in DigitalOS companies is this willingness to accept that they do not know what it's good for. They just don't know what it's good for. They know it's important, they know they have a purpose, they know they're going to figure it out, but the platform is as of yet undetermined. When Twitter started, they didn't know it was going to impact the news. They didn't know it was going to give us real-time data about governments being overthrown in another country. They just wanted to write about a ham sandwich, or I'm on the toilet, or whatever. You just don't know. This company, Emotive, is run by this amazing woman, Tan Lee, and they have developed sensors that read brainwaves, and those brainwaves are translated into the software, and you can do things like control an avatar and move him around just with your thoughts. Or you can do focus games where you raise a ball in the air and you hold it there. All these different things to start to interact with the world around us. But then you start thinking, well, what else could you do with that? If that were a platform, I could open the garage door when I get home with my mind, just open. Or I could turn the TV on or change the channel. Or I could dim the lights. Or my boss could tell whether I'm focused or not at work by just looking at the data set. This guy is clearly on Facebook. He's not paying attention. Or, and this is where the unknown comes in, or what they're finding out is, What about degenerative brain diseases? What about dementia? Can we detect dementia by looking at people's brainwaves over time? Yes. There's all kinds of things happening now with this technology they didn't expect. There's a company in Japan that's using this technology to let a quadriplegic pilot a wheelchair with no movement, not even the mouth thing, just literally sitting in the chair thinking, I'm going to go forward, then I'm going to take a right, then I'm going to take a left, and that's possible. So the unknown is really important because if there's nothing unknown about what you're doing, it's probably not a platform. It probably isn't going to scale to that level of reach. If you know what you're doing, you're in trouble. So if you don't know what you're doing, then you're in the right place. Counterintuitive. So we look at them all together. We look at this nested purpose, process, people, product, platform. And you can almost look at a business now and see, do they have good answers to each of those things? Do those answers make sense? Are those answers rooted in this day and age? And get a sense of who they are. So on the right here, I have an example of a company that may be familiar to some of you. To organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So that's the purpose, right? To organize information, make it accessible and useful. How are they going to do that from a process perspective? Many bets, right? We're going to give people 20% time to experiment. We're going to do many different things. We'll fund all sorts of crazy shit. We will have a radical user focus. We care about the user. We care about the data coming from them. And leanness and speed matter to us. If it's 1 second latent, it's not good enough for us. If we have to build our own data center to be fast enough, we'll build our own data center. If we have to buy the power company in order to feed the power to that data center, so be it, as long as we're fast. But we're going to do it lean. We're not going to buy full-price servers. We're going to hack together really shitty servers. And when one breaks, we're just going to throw it away and get another one. And we're going to do that at a scale so big and so unheard of that everyone's going to think we're freaking crazy, except for the fact that we're kicking their ass all over the place. Third thing, people. What kind of people will we have? Well, we're academics, so let's hire academics. And we're engineers, so let's hire engineers. And we really like big, hairy problems, so let's hire people that like big, hairy, nasty problems that are hard to unpack and hard to solve. And we'll make it really hard to get a job here for a while. And the fourth thing, what is the product? Well, the product is about information. The purpose tells us that. What else about the product? Well, it needs to be very simple. And it needs to be extremely scalable because whatever we do, we want it to be almost self-service. We don't want to have a customer hotline that you call to get help. We don't want to have a showroom. We just want to have products that reach the whole world and they reach it through the ones and zeros of the internet. And then finally, what are our platforms going to be? Well, these evolve over time, right? We don't know when we start that our platform is going to be AdSense. In fact, it's years before we discover that AdSense is a way to make money. And we don't know that Android's going to be a platform because we haven't even thought about mobile phones yet. But Android's going to be a platform that people can build upon and design, literally other hardware manufacturers and software creators are going to build on that. And then Google+. We really don't know what this is. But it is a platform. So this is Google, right? That's their digital OS. That's their digital operating system. And when you compare that to the competition that they faced in the beginning, the Yellow Pages, or Yahoo, or fill in the blank, you can see why they won. Because in every area, their orientation was more suited to the challenge ahead. It was more suited to the time that they operated in. So what's the from to? So if we look at the from to, this is what legacy businesses think works. And most of the biggest businesses in the world still basically operate this way, although sometimes begrudgingly. And then this is what the gangsters are doing. This is what you guys are probably doing. This is what the players are doing. Purpose is going from a commercial growth agenda, we need to grow to make money to give it to the shareholder, to a visionary growth agenda. We need to grow so that more people are impacted by our mission, by our purpose. And if we have to make money to do that, that's fine. We'll make a lot of money along the way. But the money's not the reason. The money is just a byproduct of the reason. Process, a linear process for reducing risk. All of our compliance and structure and approvals and PowerPoint decks and pitches and meetings and nonsense is all designed to prevent you, the B-player employee, from fucking up our awesome business. Not anymore. The new model is an agile process for reducing risk. We're going to reduce risk by trying more stuff. We're going to reduce risk by getting more data. We're going to reduce risk by going faster. Because if we drive faster, if we have continuous steering, then there's no risk of hitting the wall, because we can turn at any time. And then people. Managers of competitive advantage, right? This is the idea that we got to go to Wharton and get an MBA who's been trained to manage a brand, and then we give them Sprite, and we let them manage it, and they manage it for 20 years, and when they're done, it's the same old Sprite it was before. It's still clear sugared water, and it's still making a bunch of money, and then they retire, and we give it to someone else. Managers of competitive advantage become makers of competitive advantage. Who knows what business Sprite's going to be in 20 years? Is it about the beverage? Probably not. It's about something else. It's about something more, and if we don't have makers, we can't figure out what that is. Other things that are dumb. Vending machines. Vending machines are so dumb. Product. Built to last. I'm going to build one engine. I'm going to build a 727, and we're going to fly that thing for like 40 years. And when you buy it, it's expensive, and it's so expensive that you need to probably lease it, and so we'll create a capital arm, and we'll loan you the money to lease it. 2, built to evolve. The product is going to become something different all the time. I don't know how many of you unpacked your new iPhone today, but that schedule of release was not normal a while ago. You didn't get a new AT&T home phone every 6 months when our parents were our age. You know, you got one every 10 years, maybe. My mom still does that. And then platform. Closed system for us to build upon, right? The platform, you know, Windows could have been and sort of is a platform, except we want to control it, and we're going to charge a lot of money for it, and we're going to box it in. Or in some cases, you know, OS, same story. We're going to box it in, control it. To open system for the world to build upon. Let's let them have at it. Let's let the world play with it and see what comes of it. We don't have to control it. We don't have to treat it like the goose that laid the golden egg. We can let it evolve. We can let it take shape. So that's the from to that we're talking about in this digital operating system. And what is incumbent on everybody in the room, you know, some of you run big companies. Some of you run medium-sized companies. Quite a few of you seem to run small businesses or participate as freelancers in the market. That doesn't mean this doesn't apply to you. What it means is it applies at the scale you work at. So if you're an individual, it's time to think about, what is my purpose? What processes am I using to deliver on that purpose? What people do I work with, and what skills do I have as a person? What do I bring to the table as a maker, as a creator? From a product perspective, what am I making? And how am I testing it? And how am I using the processes and the skills I just talked about to bring it to life? And then from a platform perspective, what am I doing on the bigger picture here? Is there an openness? Is there a community that could be helping me out? What platforms am I leveraging as an individual that are helping me connect to a broader market, that are helping me sort of build the dream of the purpose that I have? So that's the work for everybody. And then the bigger your influence is, the bigger your reach is, the more important, the more incumbent it is that you need to do it. Because there are individuals, there are small businesses, there are startups, there are emerging players that are coming for you, that are threatening you, and that are creating that kind of impetus to change. And what gets me out of bed every morning, what gets me so excited, is that no matter what happens, everybody wins. Because if the startups have to grow up in order to kick the pants off the legacy businesses that don't operate this way and don't create work environments that we all want to live in and breathe in and go to sleep in, then that's just fine. And they'll take over, and with time that'll happen. And if we can use that pressure to take some of the biggest and most special and powerful institutions in the world that we do respect, that we do want to see thrive, and create that, cause that, then that's equally impressive, and that's equally powerful and meaningful. And so really it's a match between who can change faster, who can create faster, who can scale faster, who can bring their purpose to bear on a category that has been lazy, that is filled with stupid products in a way that will shape the world around us. And that's really what we're here to do. And so with that said, I will pass it on to questions, and then we can take a look, if possible, if we have a few minutes left, we'll take a look at one particular product model that I think is fascinating to use in your day-to-day. Okay, so this is one way to come up with a new product idea, which is fun. So if you know your purpose, this is a neat way to play, to geek out. On the left, we have what we call the market weakness. So the idea here is to find the friction. What are people frustrated about? So in the case of Uber, the friction is, I want a car, but I can't find one. I don't want to wait, and I want a certain kind of car, and I don't want to have to negotiate the price, and yada, yada, yada. I wish I had a private driver. Then you've got this idea of the internal strength. So what are we passionate about? What kind of skills do we have? What kind of makers do we have? Who am I, and what can I do? I don't code personally very well. I'm kind of a bad coder. So me choosing a project where I'm supposed to be the one building some technology is a bad idea. I'd be much better off to write a book or something like that. And then the adjacent possibility. So this is a Stephen Johnson term about what has just become possible recently in the world of technology. And I mean that very broadly, technology meaning all human endeavor. What is just recently possible that we can play with? For example, if we were using this to design a piece of content, the iPhone just came out with a fingerprint sensor, and so it is just now adjacently possible to let a cat try to unlock that sensor with its paw, which in fact it can, and that's good internet content. So adjacent possibilities, so that could be near field communication, that could be 3D printing, that could be any number of things. And then you start looking at, well, are there insights that come out of that? So we found the technology, we found the passion, we found the friction. What happens here between market and adjacent possibility? Is there something we could be building, right? So like, infant monitors have been shit for a long time. What if we put an anklet on a baby that took its heart rate and its movement and its health and its warmth, and we could beam that to a person's smartphone? That's possible today, and the market certainly wants it because baby monitors stink, and it's like you're in Scream from 1997. And then, the internal and the adjacent insight. So what's possible, and how does that align with my skills? I can't code the stuff that goes in an anklet, so that's probably not for me. So what is for me? And then finally, the market and the internal insight. What's going on in the market this week that I also have passion for, right? So I do have passion for babies. I have a 10-and-a-half-month-old son now, so I'm like that nutty dad. But what can I do with that? What's the adjacent possibility that I can explore and play with? And so that's where, I might go a different angle. I might do something that was more about a service or more about a subscription or a product that I understand. So you put those three together and you actually start to arrive at an idea, at a hypothesis or a set of hypotheses about MVPs that you could bring to life. So that's kind of a neat, just very simple model. It's an example of a process that lives in the product world. And when you look at process, as you mentioned before, it's a great question, you start finding processes that you can plug into your business where they belong. How do we hire? How do we hire people is a great question. What's the process answer to that? Well, there's all kinds of cool blog posts on the web about how great companies hire, so we plug that in. And we keep filling out our digital operating system until we have something that we feel comfortable with, and then we play it out, and we make it smarter over time. We shape it over time, and there are even processes for shaping it. I don't know how many of you guys have heard about holacracy, but it's a way of running a business that folks like Ev Williams from Obvious and Medium and Tony Hsieh and others are thinking about, and in some cases deploying in their business. It's a way of sort of having sociocracy, of letting people sense problems in the business, sense changes and opportunities, and put them into motion without some kind of hierarchical management system. And so that sort of valve idea is out there. So finding processes, plugging them in where they belong is what we're trying to do. And it is this idea of sort of making sense of what is working is just starting to happen. Most of the people that are successful today that have done something epic in the last 10 years are just sort of figuring it out as they go. There's a lot of improvisation, and it's just at the moment now where we can start to deconstruct that, learn from each other, and do some really powerful work together. So thanks for the great questions, and I'll see you guys soon.